Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this conversation with Andy Stanley. My name is Rhonda Henricks, and I work with the North Point Partner Team. And I am excited to be here today with Andy as he shares a little bit of wisdom and information about what the season that we've just been a part of and where we're headed in the future. So Andy, thanks so much for being here. I just wanted to ask you to start us off. I know a lot of churches were closed at the very beginning of this season, and they began closing. And as they began to reopen, they started coming back with adults first over children and students. And we kind of took the opposite approach to that. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and you're right. And I understood why they were doing that. So we announced that we were going to be closed for 3 weekends. And it was kind of funny because I got calls from pastors saying, why are you closed for 3 weeks? Everybody else was closing for 1. I'm like, I don't think this is going to be over in 3 weeks. I don't have a crystal ball. But anyway, so after a couple of weeks, then we announced that we were going to be closed for the entire summer. In July, then we announced we're going to be closed for the remainder of the year. And we can talk about some of that later on. But our biggest concern really was not getting adults back into the building. Our biggest concern was not losing middle school and high school students. Parents bring their children, parents bring their infants, but you know how it was. And a lot of us can remember middle school and high school is when we began to talk our parents out of making us go to church. And even though we have very robust middle school and high school environments, we just didn't want to lose our students. So we began to ask the question, what can we do to keep middle schoolers and high schoolers engaged during the season when we're not opening our building on Sunday morning for shoulder-to-shoulder in-person worship? So we shifted a lot of our assets and our attention to that. Then when we felt like it was safe to begin moving people back into the building, we began with moving middle schoolers and high schoolers back into the building. The reason that we brought them back into the building first is fortunately our staff and our parents did such a great job keeping our middle schoolers and high schoolers involved. We had so many middle schoolers and so many high schoolers, we didn't have enough room in the buildings to move them back in socially distanced along with their parents. So the good news was we were successful. The bad news was we couldn't get everybody in the building at the same time, especially at some of our campuses that are a little bit smaller than North Point Community Church. So middle school in, high school in, then as time went by, we began moving adults in. But even before we moved adults in, we went ahead and moved children in. So we had several weeks at most of our campuses where parents would show up with their children, drop them off for Upstreet, then either sit in the parking lot or go have coffee, come back and pick up their kids. So we had middle school and children on Sunday morning, high school on Sunday afternoon, and then eventually, as we figured out the whole social distancing thing, we began to move adults back into the building. So, and this really goes back to something that, we say all the time around here. What is the faith of the next generation worth? What is the faith of the next generation worth? We say it's worth everything. So by prioritizing the next generation, it forced those of us who are adults to step back, give them the space they needed in the building to keep that group of students, that part of our church connected. And I feel like our staff did a fantastic job with that. And the parents who kept their kids involved are so grateful that we did. We kept our small groups together for high school and middle school, first on Zoom, then driveway groups, then lawn groups when the weather was good, and then eventually we moved everybody back into the building. So I'm so glad we did it that way. Again, we took a little bit of, not necessarily criticism, but there were a good number of adults who were very frustrated with us that we wouldn't open the building for adults at all. And then when they found out we're letting kids in, but not adults, there were some appropriate questions. But you know what? This was a mission-driven decision for us because what is the faith of the next generation worth? It's worth everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd just be curious, what kind of feedback did we hear from our congregation on that? Did you get any sort of emails or anything on how we decided to open or?
Well, yeah, I got a lot of email, voicemail, direct messages, and people showing up at the offices who weren't happy with the fact that we closed at all. And 100% of those were politically driven. I mean, it's embarrassing to say. I never heard anybody say, Andy, we're leaving the church because we just want to be back together and worship, and you're not opening the door, so we have to go find a different church. And there were dozens of families, I'm sure, who went to other churches that opened earlier than us, and some of those folks stayed at those churches. Some of those folks have come back. But the people who had the energy and the I don't know, the folks that had, the emotion around us being closed, for the most part, it was really politically motivated. And the reason I know that was partially the content of their letters and emails, but also I called every single one of them that we had a number for. Anybody that said, we're leaving, we're upset. If they were in our database, especially if they'd been involved, and many of these folks have been involved for years, I called them on the phone. And after I convinced them that it was really me, we generally had pleasant conversations about all the church had meant to them. And then they kind of went into their anti-mask, we bought the Democratic narrative, we've succumbed to the pressure of government, all these things that really aren't true. But it was political, and that was difficult because we've tried to stay very much in the middle, very non-political. So, but we got through all that, and I think some of those folks have come back, a couple have apologized, and then others, they just had to go somewhere else. So 2020, it tested every church's commitment, and we can talk a little bit about this later. It tested our commitment to our mission, as opposed to being primarily committed to our model, because most local church models are developed around a building and around facilities. And when we closed the facilities, of course, our model didn't work anymore. So then the question was, do you abandon the model for the sake of the mission, or do you confuse the two and scramble to get back into the model because that's all you know how to do? And I'm so proud of our Atlanta area churches and many of the churches in our network of churches who were willing to set aside the model temporarily for the sake of the mission. And the churches that were able to distinguish those two and properly prioritize those two came up with unique ways of ministering to the people in their congregations, even though they weren't meeting shoulder to shoulder on Sunday morning. So it was a great test. I mean, overall, it was terrible for people in terms of health, in terms of the economy, jobs, a lot of things. But for learning organizations, we learned a lot, and hopefully we're going to carry some of those learnings forward.
Yeah, that's so great. We say around here all the time, marry your mission and date your model. So I think that was a really great example of that as well. Now we're kind of shifting to a season where our buildings are beginning to open on Sundays. I think a large majority of our churches are open, and the rest of them will be opening soon. And so as we move back to a Sunday morning in the building experience, what are your thoughts on how to leverage our online experience alongside of our physical experience?
Well, I think that's one of the things that we learned, and we sort of came up with these words. We want to rethink some things. We probably need to retire some things, and then we want to retain some things. And so one of the things that we're going to definitely retain is we got pretty successful at creating online children's experiences. In fact, we've heard from some people around the country, hey, please don't stop doing that. You've become our local church. We're still connected to a local church, but our children so look forward to what you've produced online for us and for our family. Please keep doing that. So I think we will continue to create certainly online sermon content, worship service content, even though we've tweaked some of that because of what we've learned in the process. But I think our audience in some ways got larger. So we have adapted to that on our websites. We have a place for people who are new but live outside the Atlanta area. There's a tab for them to find out what we can do and what we're doing for people who live outside the Atlanta area, as well as people who are new inside the Atlanta area. So all of those are things that we had an opportunity and felt pressure or responsibility to add when we weren't in the building, and we will continue to do those things and hopefully do an even better job. Because, one of the things that I think we've wrestled with, and I'm not sure we've wrestled with successfully, is this tension between simply broadcasting a service or broadcasting a church service and then having an online church. And we've looked at what some other churches have done with, a purely online church with an online pastor. We tried some iterations with those things. We didn't love what we were doing, so we, backed up. But I think during this, the 12 or 13 months that we were not meeting in the building, I think because we had to focus on who's on the other end of the glass as opposed to who's in the room, I think we learned some things that going forward are going to allow us to be, and this is the word I use, more inclusive in terms of talking to people in the room and people who will never be in the room. So instead of creating an online church or an online church service, that we want to learn to talk to the broader audience as well as the audience in the room so that people all over the country, all over the world feel like they're actually a part of our church as opposed to watching something that has, been designed specifically for them. So I think that's going to be our approach going forward. And I'm not sure we would have learned what we've learned and committed to what we've committed to had we not been in a situation where we only had an audience on the other end of a camera as opposed to people in the room.
Yeah, which actually brings me to you recently, at a recent staff meeting, you released some new language around kind of some new strategy language for our staff and for the way we're going to operate moving forward. Can you kind of unpack that a little bit for us in terms of what is the new language and kind of how we're thinking about it?
Yeah, so one of the tensions I had felt for quite some time, we had, I felt like a great, clear mission statement that we adopted and changed, a couple of years ago, that our mission is to inspire people to follow Jesus. We used to say we want to lead people into a growing relationship with Jesus Christ, so we shifted that language to inspire people to follow Jesus. Then you have to ask the question, how are we going to do that? Well, because we're a local church, we have a specific way of doing that. We want to engage people in the life and the mission of our local church. So the way we're going to inspire people to follow Jesus, because inspire people to follow Jesus is a mission statement that missions organizations could use, nonprofits could use, but for the local church, we want to engage people in the life and the mission of our local church. So that's kind of our banner. But then on the staff side of things, we have to answer the question, okay, well, how are we going to engage people in the life and mission of the local church? So I felt like we lacked clarity there. So we spent months working through language to have something super clear, specifically for our staff, not necessarily our congregation, to answer the question, specifically, how do we go about engaging people in the life and the mission of our church? So we came up with basically three tiers. Number one, Endear the community. This is something we never had to do 25 years ago, 20 years ago, 15 years ago when we first started. Basically, if we built it, they came. Fortunately, we were successful. Fortunately, a lot of churches felt permission to do in the Southeast what no one had done before. And now there are a lot of contemporary churches with, casual buildings and casual communication and great music. So none of that's new anymore. And so we had sort of gotten a little lazy, I feel like. And we were, the way I described it to our staff, I said, we're acting like baristas rather than missionaries. We're standing behind the counter serving up a hot cup of ministry for the people who want to come and get it. But and once upon a time, that's all we needed to do. But those days are over. Okay, we're not the new shiny toy anymore, and we live in a culture that's less and less church, and there's a lot of other things, competing for people's Sunday morning time. So we have to be more intentional about the front end, the missionary end, and so we adopted this language around endear the community. Endear the community. We want people to know we're here. We want people to know we're in the community. We want people to be happy that we're in the community, and we want people to be better off because we're in the community. So when they hear Buckhead Church or Woodstock City Church or Southside Church or North Point Community Church, we want people in the community to be, you know what? I'm not a church person, but I'm glad that group of people are in our community. So that front end is endear the community. And by putting language around it, it helps us not forget about it, because endearing the community will never feel critical. We'll never feel pressure to do that. It's not in the building. It's not anything that will really matter to us until it's too late for it to matter to us. So we needed to put language around that. So that was kind of the new component. So endear the community. The second component is inspire your audience. And I use the pronoun your for all three of these. So to our staff, I'm saying to our campus staff, you got to endear your community. You got to inspire your audience. Those are the environments. Those are the experiences we create primarily in the building, but also our online experiences. And we love the word inspire. It's content, it's emotion, it's experience. Inspire your audience, whatever your audience is. And then the third tier is to equip your core, That is, you've got to recruit and you've got to train students and adults to lead these ministry environments. So those are the three big parts of our strategy. If we can endear our community, if we can continue to appropriately inspire inspire our audience, and if we equip our core, we will be successful, we think, in engaging people in the life and the mission of our church and inspire them to follow Jesus. So this third tier that I just went through is an internal document for our staff, but I just felt like we needed some clarity around those three things, especially the Endear the community. Now, as most of the folks on this conversation or watching this conversation know, for years we've done Be Rich, and Be Rich is definitely an Endear the community component of what we do. But we do a lot of things that endear the community, but we just never had language around that. So I'm super excited about that. And back to what we were talking about before, during the COVID kind of lockdown and shutdown, we redeployed staff and we redeployed a lot of resources to endearing the community while we were unable to invite the community into our building. And I told our staff, if we get this right over these next 6 to 9 months, we will reap the rewards of that when we once again open our building. So let's not sit back and wait for COVID to go away so we can get back to what we normally do. Let's leverage this opportunity, because every crisis provides an opportunity, and good leaders and good organizations recognize, and this is the best word, I think, even though it has negative connotations, good leaders and good organizations exploit those downtimes and exploit those difficult times for the sake of moving their organization or their mission forward. And as the local church, we should be experts at exploiting difficult times with hope and with the gospel and with service and with resources. So we piled on the Endear the community during this season. Now, however, and a lot of folks on this watching our conversation can feel this. Now we're in a season where we've had to shift to equip our core, because for over a year, a lot of our volunteers had nothing to do. So they just kind of got into different routines, especially different Sunday routines. So now we're focusing on equipping our core so that as people come back to our environments, we have the volunteers that we need to do a great job inspiring our audiences. So that's our strategy. That's the new language we're using, and I'm super excited about it.
Yeah, we are too. And I know just all the churches that I'm able to talk to throughout the weeks, I definitely think that last one of Equip the Core is so vital right now. And like you said,
Yep.
and just kind of getting them back, getting the once engaged to re-engage in the church for sure. I would like to go back to just a minute on the Endear the community. You mentioned that there were several things that we tried during this last season to actually endear our community. Can you just give us a few of those examples of maybe some of the things that we have tried, and maybe a few things that we're thinking of trying? I know we're launching a bike drive as one of those in the near future. So talk to us about a few of those ideas.
Yeah, so one thing we did is we generally do launch Be Rich in November. And this year, in 2020, Be Rich, it was scheduled for September. So we moved it earlier in the year to give us more time. And it turned out to be a great decision, because our nonprofits and the nonprofits in our communities, I mean, they weren't able to do their galas. They weren't able to do their fundraisers. People weren't funding much of anything. So they needed resources earlier. And so we launched Be Rich. And I love to brag about this, because I'm not bragging about me. It's just the folks in our churches. We had the biggest Be Rich we've ever had in terms of financial giving. And I challenged our churches. I said, hey, the need is greater than ever. I want you to give more than ever. So this is really kind of amazing, Rhonda. And you were part of this, so you get this. So when we did Be Rich in September, we had not met together as a group of local churches since March. So March, April, May, June, July, August, September. And our churches collectively gave over $8 million that went directly into local community charities, nonprofits, faith-based and non-faith-based, the organizations that were doing a great job. And many of the churches who are on this, participating in this conversation today, do Be Rich or some version of Be Rich at their local church. So again, moving the date, that helped us. And then we went to the local school systems and said, what do you need? And because of online school, because the school systems were so disrupted, there were specific needs for our Fulton County schools. They said, we need books. We need books that these kids can have at home. So we did a large book drive. I think we collected like 16,000 books. I don't know what they were expecting, but we created a lot of goodwill with the public school system when that big box truck backed up and they started unloading more books than they imagined were coming in. Again, with Fulton County Schools, we've asked, what do you need? And oddly enough, to your point, they said, we need bicycles. Children need to be able to get to school and they need to be able to get to work this summer. And there are a lot of children who can't afford or will never own a bicycle. We said, okay, so we're doing a bicycle drive. We're going to try to collect 500 bicycles. That was the goal our staff came up with. That's just for North Point Community Church. So each of our campuses, again, have gone into the community and asked the people who are doing a great job with families, with children in particular, underserved communities, underserved schools, hey, what do you need? How can we help? Well, when somebody comes along and asks that question and then shows up with the goods, you just create a lot of goodwill and you have endeared the community. And again, this isn't bait and switch. There's no strings attached. This isn't, and by the way, I'll see you Sunday at church. This is just the gospel. This is just free. This is just, hey, if you ever choose to, participate with us, great. But if not, hey, we just want to be good neighbors. And again, this goes back to sort of our tagline, why we decided to suspend in-person worship services. We said, we put on our doors, a lot of our churches did this, we're not having live worship services because this is how we're going to be a good neighbor and this is how we're going to protect our neighborhoods. So again, we learned so much in those seasons. Some of those initiatives we will carry forward in the future, and some of those were just time sensitive during the crisis of created by COVID.
Yeah, that's great. One of my favorite stories, I think, coming out of our churches was the blood drives that we were able to be a part of.
Oh, yeah.
And do you want to tell a little bit about that story?
Oh, yeah, that was... the Red Cross was always looking for opportunities to, do blood drives. And a lot of blood drives happen on college campuses. College campuses weren't meeting. Most of them, had disbanded or they weren't allowing people to gather. So suddenly, at least in the Atlanta area, Red Cross was in big trouble. They just didn't have enough blood. On top of that, so many more emergency room situations because of COVID and other things. So we began hosting blood drives. And at the end of 2020, the Red Cross contacted us, North Point Community Church, and said we were by far the number one location for blood drive. They collected more blood from us than any other site in the state of Georgia, by far. And they said, typically at a blood drive, they will gain maybe 4 to 12 new blood donors. At North Point Community Church alone, 750 new people came to donate blood. So we were number one. Buckhead Church was number 5, and all of our Atlanta area churches showed up in the top 25 sites in the state of Georgia for blood donation. So again, this was, it didn't cost us anything. We just opened up a portion of our building. The Red Cross came in and, did their thing, and then we just promoted it and then, invited people to give blood. So again, those were the kinds of things that we've never done we haven't been that intentional specifically about, partnering with the Red Cross. But I have a feeling they're going to continue to call, and we will continue to answer that call.
Yeah, that's just so exciting to know that. And it goes back to that whole idea of endear your community and help, that we want them to be happy that we're here. And so that's just another one of those great ways. I love that story. Let's switch gears just a little bit and talk about leadership during uncertain times. Most of the leaders that are watching this conversation today with us are probably thinking, goodness, I just came out of a really tough season. Leadership is hard. Leadership's hard anyway. And then you come out of a season like this, it's really hard. What would you say to leaders that are listening in, how to lead through a time of uncertainty? Yeah,
well, we talked a lot about this because everything, 2020, everything was uncertain. It really was for leaders, for church leaders who navigated it. And even if you don't feel like you did a great job, you did a great job. There were no maps. There was nobody to call. Nobody had ever done this before. It's a pandemic with an economic shutdown that led to an economic meltdown, job loss in the middle of an election year that resulted, ended up with the Capitol being stormed. Okay, so can we add anything to that? And the other thing that's unique that we forget about, this wasn't local. This wasn't just in your community or even in our country. This was a worldwide pandemic. What's happening right now in India alone is so tragic. It is so tragic. So the ripple effects of this just continue to roll out. So for the leaders out there, and you feel like, wow, it was so hard, I don't feel like I did a very good job, you probably did a far better job than you know, because we didn't have anything to measure it against. All the metrics were out the window. Our model was out the window. Everything we'd known before, everything we built our reputations and our skills around, all of it just, it evaporated seemingly overnight. So we were left with a group of people looking to us for direction, and the key to leading through uncertainty is clarity. We cannot provide certainty. And the leaders who promise certainty are going to disappoint people. This is what politicians do all the time. Unfortunately, in the United States, you have to promise certainty to get elected, but you can't provide it because only God works in the realm of certainty, and that's the future. But the next best thing to certainty is clarity. So knowing this, when we kind of hit that wall coming up on July, when I realized, hey, we're not going to open in August like we told everybody we were going to, I knew the best thing for me to do was to provide as much clarity around what we could do as opposed to, sitting back and waiting to see what possibly would happen that would open doors for other things we could do. So instead of focusing on what we couldn't do, we decided to focus on what we could do. And then my responsibility was to be and this is the key, to be as specific as possible in giving people something to do. Because if I feel like the leader has told me what to do, that's about as close to certainty as I'm going to get without somebody being able to predict the future. So for the leaders out there who were specific and clear, you led well. And again, whether what you asked people to do worked out or not, again, we announced we're going to open in 3 weeks. Then we said we'll open in August. Then we said we'll open in 2021. Again, you write your plans in pencil always, but your vision remains the same. You focus on your mission. You suspend your model when you have to. You tweak your model because at the end of the day, it's the mission that ultimately matters. And so for the mission-driven organizations, secular or non-secular, those mission-focused organizations generally weathered the storm. And I think those are the ones that learn the most and have the most to take forward, the lessons to take forward into this new season of business or this new season of ministry.
As we look ahead and just facing, we know leaders are tired, they're fatigued, they're maybe frustrated. As we just end our call today, do you have anything that you'd love to say to leaders to send them off?
Yeah. This is what I say to church leaders all the time. If it's hard, you're doing it right. This is just hard. Here's a quick story. My dad is 88. He just retired from First Baptist Church of Atlanta this past fall. Since the church wasn't meeting anyway, he's like, what the heck, I might as well resign. So he resigned. They had somebody in place that was going to step in when he decided to do that. So all that worked out great. 88, but when he was 83 or 84, he called me one day. And he said, Andy, do you know what I would like? I said, what? He said, he's 83 or 84. He said, I would like to find a pastor who's a little bit further ahead than me, and I'd like to ask them some questions. I'm like, what? He said, yeah, I'd like to find somebody. I said, Dad, there's not anyone further ahead. They have either all died or they've retired, okay? You are the last man standing. I don't know of any other 84-year-old pastors who are still the senior pastor of a big church and running a nonprofit, his nonprofit In Touch Ministries. I said, but I am curious. I said, if you could find such a person, what would you ask them? And here's what he said. And this is not encouraging, but it'll put your current concerns in context. He said, I would like to ask them, does it ever get any easier? And I said, Dad, do you know how discouraging that is to me? Because here's the point, the thing. When you are at the point of the spear for any organization, but especially a local church, the headwinds are so fierce. And there are good seasons, and there are difficult seasons, and there are seasons you enjoy, and there are seasons you just have to endure. And if you have just come through one, in fact, we've all just come through one of those seasons, that's normal. You're doing it right. The key is to find a rhythm that works for you, not everybody else. Give yourself permission to play to your rhythm. And then surround yourself with people who know how to encourage you the way that you need to be encouraged. Get a counselor if you need a counselor. Find somebody where you can just pour your heart out to. Ask the questions that you need to ask. And again, going back to what Rhonda said a few minutes ago, when you can find a group of like-minded church leaders who share your concerns, your passions, your fears, and your hopes and dreams, there's something about that that just fuels us and keeps us fueled. And that's why my 84, 85-year-old dad was saying, I would like to talk to somebody else who's doing this, because he was wise enough to know if I can find another like-minded person, perhaps that will, provide me with whatever it is I need to keep going. Unfortunately, as I said, he might have been the last man standing. So fortunately, at 88, he finally laid down the mantle of church leadership. But wow, he did such a good job. And it was just a great reminder to me that I've got to find my pace, I've got to find my rhythm, just like you've got to find yours, and then give yourself permission to stick with it.
Andy, thank you so much for sharing those words of wisdom with the leaders that are listening today. So appreciate your time and energy towards helping all of us get better as leaders. Thank you so much for joining this conversation today with Andy Stanley.